Saturday night and the evening news now on BBC One with Kate Silverton.
Typhoon Mankhut, the most powerful storm in the world this year, wreaks havoc in the Philippines. At least 14 people have been killed. The true extent of the destruction still unclear. In the United States, President Trump declares a disaster in North Carolina following Storm Florence amid warnings that the worst is far from over. A former British soldier sentenced to 7 years in jail in Turkey, accused of helping Kurdish forces in the fight against the Islamic State group.
A braver rider, you'd be hard-pushed to find the way he...
Simon Yates is set to win the Vuelta a España, the first time British cyclists have won all 3 Grand Tours in the same year. Hello, very good evening to you. Up to 14 people have now died in a massive storm which has brought destruction to the northern Philippines. Typhoon Mankhut has seen violent winds of over 160 miles an hour, torrential rains and warnings of 6-metre storm surges. More than 4 million people live in its path. Thousands have already been evacuated. Howard Johnson reports.
Mankhut has been called by meteorologists the strongest typhoon in the world so far this year. And now the reality of the utter devastation it has caused is becoming obvious. Extreme flash flooding, the fragility of human existence laid bare. The road to Cagayan province was littered with destruction. Electricity posts ripped from the ground, street lamps bent in two, and Mr. Mina's house torn to shreds. He showed me where the roof had been pulled back like a tin of sardines. Fighting back the tears, he told me how he'd spent the night in an evacuation centre, worrying about the fate of his home. When we arrived in Cagayan province, we saw a line of people queuing for fuel to power their generators.
How did you feel?
Scared. We were so scared.
All windows broken. Whole night, not sleep.
The scene here repeated across this vast region. Debris scattered across the ground, electricity cables dangling dangerously, people wading their belongings through floodwaters. 2 rescue workers were killed in one of many landslides, and a 3rd person drowned in 6-metre high storm surges. A team of search and rescue workers. Clearly, it had been a long night.
Our evacuees total to about 43,000, scattered in more than 500 evacuation centers. We have not really released them yet because of the kind of wind that we have until now.
The typhoon is now on its way to southern China and Vietnam. It's expected to pass near Hong Kong tomorrow. The magnitude of the devastation left behind here in the Philippines still isn't known, and more heavy rain is on its way. Howard Johnson, BBC News to Gigarao.
Let's pick up on that last point with our correspondent Jonathan Head, who's also in the Philippines in Santiago. Jonathan, as Howard said, the true scale of the destruction and indeed the casualties far from clear.
No, the problem is that along the north coast of the island of Luzon, where I'm standing now, there are very small villages with roads that in many cases are still blocked. All communications have been cut. It's taking rescuers some time to get through to them, and these are places where the worst is feared in terms of houses being completely flattened, even some of the evacuation centres damaged. Having said that, so far the death toll is relatively moderate. The authorities were very well prepared for this. They did evacuate anyone who was at risk of tidal surges. We've got no big towns, big population centres on the coast vulnerable to those tidal surges, mostly much smaller villages. There's a lot of flooding. We've seen rivers very, very high, absolutely ferociously fast. We're also hearing about a lot of landslides. So I think it's going to take some time before the full picture is very, very clear. And also the economic damage to what is, after all, the breadbasket of the Philippines. That's something that will take a long time to calculate.
Yes, indeed. Jonathan, thank you. Jonathan Head there. Well, in the United States,